Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar on best practice in food science and nutrition literature searching for academic institutions in Spain. Our presenter today is Carol Hollier. She's a Senior Information Literacy and Outreach Manager at IFIS Publishing. After Carol's tutorial, we will have a question and answer opportunity. So if you have any questions for us, please send them in using the chat facility at any time during the webinar, and we'll address these at the end. We're recording today's webinar and we'll be sending the recording out to everyone afterwards. And if you've requested to receive a certificate of attendance, we'll send that out as well. My name is Angela Ball. I am the Customer Relations Manager at IFIS Publishing, and I'll be available on the live chat throughout. Before we hand over to Carol, I'd like to introduce Carlos Camper from EBSCO, who's going to provide an introduction in Spanish. Over to you, Carlos.
Hola, hola a todo el mundo. Ya tenemos 21 personas conectadas. Van a ir conectándose, imagino, algunos más. Hay hasta 63 profesionales, bibliotecarios, investigadores que se han apuntado, así que irán, imagino, incorporándose. Yo voy a hacer un poco una introducción de 2 minutos, y porque, bueno, lo importante es lo que van a contar sobre la guía de los expertos. Mi especialidad es el marketing para bibliotecas y, pues bueno, básicamente para mí FSTA es una herramienta que ofrece ventaja competitiva, sin más. Básicamente cuesta lo mismo leerse un artículo, digamos, bueno que uno malo. Son las mismas páginas, exactamente lo mismo. ¿Qué te da FSTA? Pues FSTA lo que te da es la posibilidad de poder estar más o menos seguro de que te estás leyendo el correcto, básicamente, y además mantenerte permanentemente informado en eso que tú necesitas. Me da igual que sea a la hora de escribir un TFG, un trabajo de fin de grado, fin de máster, estar permanentemente informado, como mantener una línea, digamos, de alerta sobre las áreas que a ti te interesan, porque digamos que el barrido que hace FSTA sobre las áreas en las que pega fuerte, digamos, que pues es único. O sea que una búsqueda más nunca viene mal. Una búsqueda más marca la diferencia entre una información ok y una información brillante. Entonces, quiero hacer una recomendación también a los bibliotecarios que estáis aquí en esta sesión para que animaros a activar en vuestras herramientas de descubrimiento el placard. O sea, esa herramienta que tiene la herramienta de descubrimiento que hace que cuando tú tecleas o un usuario teclea pues yo que sé, tecnología de los alimentos, por ejemplo, se le recomiende automáticamente FSTA. Esto es muy útil, o sea, aparecería, digamos, ya sabéis lo que es el placard, es una recomendación que hace la herramienta de descubrimiento y te pone arriba, digamos, esa recomendación de ese recurso con un texto explicando por qué ese recurso es importante para esa búsqueda que tú has hecho y recomendándote que se use, digamos. Esto se puede activar en las herramientas de descubrimiento, es gratis, no tiene ningún problema. Yo me pondré en contacto con todos los que suscribís ahora mismo y para facilitaros los textos y justo lo que tenéis que poner y dónde tenéis que poner en cada descubridor. Y es muy interesante porque al final, digamos que ayuda a ese alumno que desconoce la existencia de FSTA, bueno, le da esa ventaja competitiva de llevarle a la herramienta que marca la diferencia. Entonces, precisamente las personas que están aquí son los que saben que existe FSTA, pero lo interesante desde el punto de vista también del profesor es poder llevar a los alumnos, a mis alumnos que están haciendo un TFG, un TFM, que se prepara una clase inversa o que tienen una necesidad concreta de información o simplemente quieren marcar la diferencia con el resto, en utilizar las tecnologías y las herramientas que están utilizando, digamos, los investigadores de nivel. Y esto es una recomendación para profesores que es muy sencillo, simplemente es llevar al alumno hacia esta ventaja competitiva, implica, pues nada, darle a conocer, digamos, ese tipo de herramientas. No me voy a entretener más, mi labor va a ser, bueno, pues escuchar como todo el mundo y luego al final, si hace falta traducir alguna pregunta, aunque mi inglés no es muy bueno, intentaré traducir la pregunta del español al inglés, si fuera el caso. Y nada, voy a devolver la palabra a Ángela para que siga con la presentación. Ángela, I'm ready. Angela. Hello, Angela.
Angela, you might be on mute.
I've just realized I am.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very
Angela.
much, Carlos. Now over to Carol for
Thank you.
best practice presentation.
Okay, thank you so much, Angela and Carlos. I am Carol Hollier, and I'm the Senior Information Literacy and Outreach Manager for IFAS Publishing. And so IFAS Publishing, if you're not familiar with us, is a leading international provider of information relating to the sciences of food and health. And we're also an educational charity with an ongoing commitment to learning and development. And we have a reputation for scientific integrity, accuracy, and excellence. And over the past couple of years, we've been undertaking a mission to work to explore and establish best practices for literature searching in this field. So we produce the Food Information Database, FSTA, Food Science and Technology Abstracts. But we also have our wider educational mission, which this webinar is a part of. So today, if my slides will move for me. Okay, so today what I want to cover in the time that I have is the purposes and complications of literature searches, and then looking specifically at what are the characteristics of a good search. And in doing so, we'll think about where to search and also think about how to search. And we'll touch upon some of the common problems that people conducting literature searches run into, and also look at strategies that we can use to avoid those problems. And finally, we'll turn to resources that IFAS Publishing has created to help support people in conducting good, high quality, comprehensive literature searches. So as Angela said at the beginning, please do feel free to ask questions as the presentation goes along. If you put them into the chat facility, then we'll save them until the end of the presentation, but there will be time set aside for questions and answers then. So if we think about why people search for literature, there's a variety of different reasons. It can be done on a really in-depth scale, or sometimes it can be done quite briefly. So sometimes it's done to provide the context for and justify further research. Sometimes it's a scoping exercise to learn about the terminology and different concepts related to a new field. And sometimes it can just be to dive in and find some key information that you need for a particular purpose. And then, of course, there's always the very important aspect of literature searching of keeping up to date on a topic that you're interested in. So as more research is published, you're aware of it. So the same principles apply to all these different searches, but overall, probably well, I don't know if it's the most important, but when people think of literature searching, often they're thinking of a literature searching in the context of a literature review, which is providing the context for and justifying research. And this is actually very crucial. To get a sense of how crucial this is, a study that was published in the medical journal Lancet found that 12.5% of biomedical research that's done is actually redundant or unnecessary because of previous research. So it's basically already been done. So this is a waste of time and effort and funding. Inadequate literature reviews can lead to papers being submitted to journals and then being rejected for publication, or even worse, needing to be retracted. And in a very most extreme example, an insufficient literature review actually led to a death at Johns Hopkins University in the United States of a young and healthy study participant. The researcher had missed in his literature review information about the potential lethality of one of the substances that he used in his trial. And despite the harm, the potential harm the substance could cause, having been well established in the 1950s. So knowing the principles will help, and what you're looking for in your literature search will help any searcher avoid problems, hopefully, or make them much less likely to have some of these problems that are quite common in both this field and probably every other discipline in academia. So when you're searching, you are actually in this current information landscape that we all have to operate in today. We're facing challenges. So perhaps in food science, one of the most important challenges is the sheer quantity of information that's being produced. To give you a sense of this, in science in general, the publication outputs are growing at about 3% overall per year, but in food science, it's growing, that publication outputs are growing at an average of about 10% every year. So to give you another sense of this rate of growth, over the past 15 years, the number of institutions that include food science in their offerings has doubled internationally. So, of course, having so much information available creates both opportunities and challenges for researchers in the field. The opportunity is that there is a lot of fantastic research available out there. But the challenge is that with so much fantastic research, how do you find exactly what it is that you need? So unfortunately, another challenge that we all face in today's information landscape is the challenge of quality. So along with very high quality research, there is also a lot of dubious and outright bad information out there too, and it's mixed in with the good, and it's just as easily accessible, and in some cases actually almost more accessible than the quality research. So food science, like other fields, is plagued by the problem of bad science that's being published by predatory journals. So a predatory journal is sometimes called a fake or a deceptive or a shell journal, and their features can vary, but the defining predatory features of the journals are that they market themselves with false accolades and credentials and attempt to present themselves as legitimate or even prestigious journals. They're designed to take advantage of the high demands of researchers, typically young doctoral students, to publish articles towards their PhD or their postgraduate assessments. And their motive is a profit motive. They charge APCs or open access article processing charges, and then they publish the articles. And they usually say that they will peer review the material, but the turnaround is so fast that you know that it's actually quite impossible. To get a sense of how prevalent this problem is, particularly in the area of food sciences and health, you can look at the numbers that I have displayed on the screen. So journals can submit themselves to ask to be indexed in FSTA, our database. And in 2020, in the calendar year 2020, of the 84 journals that were submitted for indexing in the in the database, pardon me, we had 9 of them were suspected of being predatory and rejected. Over the past 12 months, we actually had 122 requests for indexing, and of those, 60 were suspected of being predatory. So that was 49% of the submissions. And these 60 journals came from 15 different publishers. So it's not an exaggerated problem. It's actually very rife in the field. So the quantity of bad science circulating as legitimate science clearly poses a major challenge to researchers. So, and it's unfortunately been documented that searching tools, trusted searching tools like Scopus, sometimes inadvertently include predatory materials in their indexes. And certainly if you're using a tool like Google Scholar, and even PubMed, you can be certain that there is some predatory material in there, more with Google Scholar than PubMed probably, but there are very few tools that are available that have the same rigorous assessment in the field of food science that FSTA does, so that you know when you're searching FSTA that you're getting sound research. Oops. So sometimes the quality challenge is just sort of clogging up your search results. So we are all familiar in using Google Scholar that you do a search and you tend to get thousands, if not tens of thousands of results, sometimes hundreds of thousands of results. And one of the reasons that the number tends to be so very high is that the collecting of what's included in Google Scholar is done by bots, by artificial intelligence, and it sometimes makes decisions that no human would make. So for instance, here we have examples of lunch menus that are supposedly written by L. Pear, L. C. Salad, BS Ravioli, WB Sausage, etc., as scholarly journals. So it's something that's easy to look at and laugh, but when you're practically conducting searches, this kind of dreck just will clog up your results and make it a little bit harder to go through and find the actual quality material that you're looking for, just because of the fatigue of sorting through too much material. So now if we turn to searching, the question is, what is it that makes a good search? As a researcher who has undoubtedly many demands on their time, one key thing for searching is that it should be efficient. But at the same time that it's efficient, it's also important that you know that it's comprehensive. So you need to be confident that the results that you get as well are reliable. So if we think about what a literature review is, a definition of a literature review is the critical assessment of the literature relating to a particular topic. And the goal of a literature review, keeping in mind that there are different kinds of reviews, from scoping reviews to narrative reviews, etc. But the goal is basically to identify, evaluate, and synthesize the existing body of evidence, and to do so with as little bias as possible. And so it has 4 defining characteristics. One is that it's comprehensive, so you don't want to miss any of the important literature that's been written on your question. It needs to be systematic, And systematic is talking about the process you use to find the information in your review. So by being systematic in your literature searching, you can be assured that your review actually is comprehensive. Systematic searching means that you will have looked in all the appropriate ways, in all the appropriate places to find valid and relevant research. So we'll look at this process for how you actually do this later in the presentation. Your literature review should be reproducible. So this is important for two reasons, both for yourself at the end of writing a project. You'll want to make sure that you can rerun your searches to be sure that no significant literature has been published since the last time you looked, so that you can include it, for instance, in your PhD defense or in the article that you're about to publish. And then it's also important for others because having a reproducible literature search allows you to demonstrate convincingly how you got to where you did with your searches, and that your review is indeed systematic and therefore comprehensive. And finally, you want your review, or your review needs to be objective. And by this, we mean that having systematically and comprehensively combed the literature, which represents the body of existing knowledge on a question, you are sure that you include all the relevant and valid results, whether or not they are convenient for you. So hopefully it's unlikely that many people would deliberately skew or make non-objective a literature review. But if your literature search hasn't been systematic and comprehensive, then it's very easy and in fact likely that a literature review would be biased and then inadvertently, accidentally, not objective. So this is a view of what the finished product should be in your literature searching. So the question now is, how do we get there? And in thinking about that, it's very important to think about the tools that we use for our searches. So it's clear, I think, that being systematic in your searching is a linchpin upon which a good literature search, a comprehensive literature search, rests. Because without being systematic, it's really difficult to be sure that your review is comprehensive. And if you don't know if it's comprehensive, then you don't know if your review is objective. So how can you be systematic? It helps to use tools that have been designed to help researchers search systematically. So it's helpful, I think, to step back and think about the tools that we use and what their primary purposes are, and how they work, and how you can work with them to get out of them what you need. And so key to understanding how tools work are the concepts of discovery and access. Discovering information is finding out that it exists. So learning that there is an article that writes up research results, or a patent describing an invention, or a standard. Access is actually getting your hands on the full text of that article or patent or standard. So some tools are designed with discovery as their primary purpose, and other tools have access as their primary purpose. And then there are actually lots of discovery tools that are set up to help with seamless or almost seamless access to the material that you discover through them. So this is a great thing, but I think it tends to blur the distinction between discovery and access tools for a lot of researchers. And the reason this distinction is key is because discovery and access should happen in a separate order. So they are two separate things, even though you can often use the same tool for both. And they do need to happen in the particular order, with discovery coming before access. If you conflate discovery with access, then you will almost certainly not meet the standards you need for your literature review. It won't be systematic and it won't be comprehensive, and therefore it runs a high risk of being biased. So if we look at some tools out there that are commonly used, we can sort them into where they go on a discovery or access spectrum. So there's some like Web of Science, which is a citation index, or CAB abstracts, which is abstracting and indexing database, or FSTA, which is also an abstracting and indexing database. PubMed also falls on that side of discovery, designed for discovery, even though it often also links to the full text of the articles. And then we have things that are falling on the access side. So academia.edu and ResearchGate. So these are tools that researchers they're like researcher networking platforms, but sometimes people try to use them as discovery tools to find out about new research. Science Direct is not a discovery tool. It's absolutely a full text publisher platform. And so people are often in food science surprised to learn that this popular tool actually only contains about 20% of the published research on in the field of food science. And that's because it only contains the research that's published by Elsevier. So it's excellent for access, but it's very, very limited for discovery. Wiley Online Library, same thing. There are many publisher platforms that are great for access, but not designed for discovery. And then there are some tools, library discovery portals, so often the library search, that kind of straddle both categories. Because they're designed for discovery, but then they also help you seamlessly access as much of the material that the library subscribes to as possible. It's important to remember or realize, if you didn't know this, that some of these library discovery tools, so the main search portal for a library, don't include all of the databases that a library might subscribe to. And this is it's usually because of licensing agreements behind the scenes. But just because you're searching the main library portal, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily searching all the material that's available through your university library. So I want to take a minute to talk about how a thesaurus works. So I, on the last slide, talked about abstracting and indexing databases, and all of the tools on this slide, PubMed, Web of Science, FSTA, and CAB abstracts, have some kind of indexing. And 3 of them, PubMed, FSTA, and CAB abstracts, actually use controlled vocabulary. And so another word for controlled vocabulary is a thesaurus. And this is a framework of terms that are specific to a field. So in the case of PubMed, it's MESH headings, the medical subject headings. In CAB abstracts, they're agriculture based, because that's the main focus of that database, the primary focus of that database. And in FSTA, the thesaurus is focused on the vocabulary, the terms that researchers in the fields of food science and health-related, food-related health will use in their research. And so what the thesaurus does is it underpins and makes discovery more efficient. So in this example, the term we're looking at is flavor here. And you can see that there's a lot of more specific types of flavor that we see and related terms that have to do with flavor. But down here, there's also used for, so there's flavor or taste. And flavor here is spelt the American way. Up here, it's spelt with a U, so the way that people do in the UK. And taste is another word that's often used interchangeably with flavor. And so what this does is it helps you as a searcher run a single search that can bring together, using any of these words, flavor, taste, or flavor spelt with the U, just pull together all the variations in ways that researchers around the world talk about a common concept. If we look at this in comparison to Google Scholar Search, if we do a search for flavor spelt with no U, then these are the top searches we get. I did these searches this morning, so they're up to date. But if I do a search with flavor with a U, I get a very different set of results at the top. If I add an S, then my search results change once again. So on the other hand, if I do a search for flavor spelt with no U here, and I just did it in a title, and I did it in FSTA on the EBSCO host platform, you'll see that the first result has it spelt this way, and the second result has it spelt with a U. So I didn't need to do the brainstorming and realize all the different ways that researchers around the world might spell the same word, and there will also be results with taste that also appear in my results list. So working with a database that has a controlled vocabulary that will pull in these variations for you, whether or not you use this thesaurus actively as a tool in your searching, it will already do much of the work for you to ensure that the results set that you get is comprehensive and not restricted by you not actually being aware of all the variations of terms that a person might use, researchers in different parts of the world might use for that concept. So then the question that we're all faced with is, we might know these things. There are different kinds of tools. Some are better for searching, some are better for access. And then there's the question of where will you actually search? So that depends on what you can search. What do you have access to? What does the library at your institution subscribe to? And if your library doesn't subscribe to very much, what's really available for you online? And Carlos, I believe, mentioned a tool that you can have in your library search interface that's called the recommender, which will, if you're doing a search already in the library portal, will help point you to the best tools. Your library also may well have subject guides, which will help point you to the resources that they have available that are best for this discipline. So it's worth contacting your librarian and exploring the web pages to see what you can find, because you want to make use of the best tools that you have available. Oops. And so then, if we think about this, the question of people conflating access and discovery, if we think about this actual steps for doing a good literature search, you'll see that starting with the discovery side actually isn't really as arduous as it might seem if you think, well, that's 2 steps and I really just want to find the full text right away. The process for doing a good search is to start with identification. So you go and find out about what it is that has been published in your area that is relevant, and you usually go through to several different tools to make sure that you're comprehensive. Although if you're just doing a quicker search, then you can go to the main best tool for your topic. So it depends on how big a project it is that you're working on. And then you gather together the records, so the abstracts, and you at that point can screen for the ones that are actually relevant. So you only need to actually get the full text for the ones that you can tell from the records are going to be relevant to your project. And then once you get the full text, you have to go then screen that much more carefully. So that's when you will exclude some of them, because even though they appeared to be relevant, they end up not being relevant. Or perhaps, depending on the tool you used, you found one that turns out to be unsound science, so you don't want to include that. And then the final step is to synthesize these, so group them together for impact. So I want to look at this quickly with a concrete example. And so the concrete example, the question that I'm looking at is, how does Fusarium, which is a fungus in grain, affect gushing in beer? So sometimes beer, when you open a bottle of beer, the beer will kind of, flow out of the bottle and be wasted. And it's not something that you want to have happen. And so it's a problem that that you might want to be doing research on to figure out what causes it and how to prevent it. So we can use different tools to structure our search for this. So I've got a question here, but we can use a tool like this chart to then break it down into a more comprehensive search. So we pull out the keywords of our question. So the main concepts here are Fusarium and gushing and beer. And then we can start to brainstorm for different variations on each of the concepts. So just because we frame our question in one way doesn't mean that we're capturing the right vocabulary that all researchers are going to be using to describe our question. So you can use a chart like this to brainstorm and prompt yourself to think of various ways that researchers might talk about your question. And then you need to structure your search. So put it together using different devices that help you make a good search string that actually has the tool that you're using understand the relationship of the terms to each other in the way that you need that tool to understand them. So the 2 key Boolean operators that you'll be using are and or. So or is used for words that are different variations of the same term. So, and whether or not a term is appropriate to string together with an or is really in the hands of you, of the researcher. So it depends on the context of your question. It's not always that there's straight synonyms. So in this case, beer is not the same thing as brewing, but they're related to the same question. So I made a decision that I want to use either variation or both of them to find the literature. So this is something that's entirely up to you and your knowledge in a topic to decide whether or not it's appropriate. And then and is what you use to connect the different concepts so that each of the concepts actually appears. So you're not just getting research literature about beer or just getting research literature about fusarium or just about gushing, but you're getting the research literature that touches upon all three of those concepts together. Another really handy device is truncation. So, and that's where you put to the beginning of a word, so the trunk of it, and then use usually an asterisk. In some databases, it's a $sign, and it will give you the letters that you've typed, followed by any letters that might that could appear. So sometimes you'll truncate too early and you'll get things that aren't actually what you want, but often it's really, really powerful. And if you truncate too early, you just readjust your search. So what you'll find is you'll start running a search and you'll decide that you don't need some of the terms, and you'll cross them out. So it's a living document. So for instance, with fusarium, there's a lot of different variations of fusarium, but we don't need to write those all out because each one of them is captured just by fusarium. And then if we look at this actually in like translated into a search form, this is what it can look like. It can, so if you have multiple boxes, then it's a good idea to put your same concepts with different variations of it in a single search box separated by the ors, and then have each of the boxes separated by an and. So you're saying, I want this concept or the beer concept or the fusarium concept. This actually is the same search in a different type of search framework. So where you have to build it quite systematically. And this, again, is exactly the same search, but just in a single search box. Although I believe this one is missing ale. So the search can appear in different ways, but they're always using the same ands and the ors, and they are, it's just depending on the tool that you're using. So there are some common errors to avoid that even experienced librarians and researchers make. One search doesn't fit all databases. So this is something that we see quite frequently, where somebody will find a search that works really well in a particular database and they'll just change it, pull it exactly as is into another database. And what that doesn't take into account is the scope of the literature in the database, the constraints. Does it have a controlled vocabulary on a particular search area? So for instance, in FSTA, where everything is focused on food science, you never have to type the term food science, and you often can get a better search with fewer concepts because you're working from a smaller pool of results that's really focused on the topic. Whereas if you're doing a search in the Web of Science core collection, which has more literature but across many, many, many more disciplines, then you will usually find that it's helpful to add an additional concept, because you'll be getting times when the term that you're using is used in a different sense than what you intend. And you'll also have times when there's just sort of related results that aren't actually relevant, so you want to focus it down more. So it's a good idea to bring the main ideas over, but adjust for each database. And then another really important principle is, if you're surprised by the results that you're getting in a database, for instance, if you're in an agricultural database and you don't seem to be getting very many results about your agricultural question or your food science question in FSTA, it's probably because there's some kind of error in your search and not because the database doesn't have the literature that you would expect to find in it. So it might be that the search term that you're using is wrong. It might be that you're restricting your search in some way that's wrong. It might be that you're using a Boolean operator and where you meant to use a Boolean operator or. So always, always, always at first assume that the error is yours and not the database's. So there's things to think about when you're framing your search. Always think about the subject focus of the database or the lack of it. Does it have a controlled vocabulary? If it does, then it's worth generally going into that vocabulary to explore it in your subject, in your question area, in your terms area, so that it can help you shape your search better. But even if you don't do that, it will be underlying your search and helping it be a better search. And then also think about how the subject focus will help shape the controlled vocabulary. And then you also want to think about the kind of content that you need. Do you just want scholarly articles? Are you trying to find patents or conference proceedings? Some databases will index some of these items and some won't. So educate yourself about what you'll be able to find where. And then finally, the question of the date range you need is a really important question. One of the things that we found at IFAS Publishing when we did our research for the best practice guide that you will have had a link to is that again and again, the advisory board who reviewed the guide and who talked about the problems that they run into mentioned that often people just searched the literature that was very, very recent, and they missed the foundational research. So we had the extreme example at the beginning of the presentation about the Johns Hopkins case, where a principle about a substance was well established in the 1950s, and somebody who was doing a literature search now just didn't go back far enough in their searches. So this is something that people talk about again and again and again. So with their PhD students, with the literature reviews, they find that students aren't understanding the history of the literature, and they're only looking at the most recent material. And so this is something that you should definitely not do yourself. So looking at the historical literature is important. Getting to know how to use Boolean operators and truncations and to build a good search string is very helpful. Delving into the database thesaurus will help you get to know the vocabulary that you want to be building into your search to make it much more comprehensive. And then don't forget, when you find a good search strategy, to record it exactly so that you don't lose it, so that you can replicate it. And do remember that each database you use requires tweaks to your search strategy. So record the variation for each one. So I want to go now to the best practice guide really briefly, and just draw your attention to it if you haven't looked at it already. We're very lucky to have recently been able to get this translated into Spanish, but this gives step-by-step guidance to to doing a good literature search. It has been reviewed and shaped by the FSTA Advisory Board, who are an international board of very prominent food scientists. So the people from North America are here, from Asia Pacific, and from Europe and the Middle East and Africa and China. So it's something that has been informed by people who are really shaping the field around the world, and informed by questions and problems that they see in the work of the students that they are advising, or in articles that they see submitted to journals and so forth. So if you use this guide, it will help you do a very, very, very sound literature search yourself. And it includes guidance for critiquing your results, thinking about which of the many results that you find in your searching are actually applicable that you want to keep in the results page or in your results group. So anyway, so that's my overview of best practices for literature searching. I feel like I've covered quite a lot of ground in a short amount of time. So I would like to open up the floor to any questions that anybody has at this point.
Thank you, Carol. We did receive a couple of questions during the webinar. If anyone has any additional questions, please do send them through on the chat facility. So the first one I've got is related to whether it's discovery or access. How can you tell what kind of database or search tool you're using?
Okay, so the key thing is if you look at the kind of records that you're getting. So if I go, I'm going to go, here I am in FSTA on EBSCO host. And so I'll actually clear this search. And if I do a quick search of, I don't know, cheese. So very, 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 very simple search. Oops, I've gotten logged out. Sorry. Bear with me. So I'll do a very, very simple search. Cheese. Spell it correctly. And when I open up the top record, then I can see that this has the bibliographic information. So it's got the title and it's got the information for finding where this article has been published. So which journal it's in, and it has the abstract here. And then it has keywords, which are the subject terms or the thesaurus terms that have been assigned to this record to help make it more discoverable. So as soon as you have keywords, which can be called different things in different databases, sometimes they're called subject headings, sometimes they're called the mesh headings. So in PubMed, they're mesh headings. Sometimes they're called descriptors. So I don't know why there's so many different words for these terms, but as soon as you find a list of words like this, then you know that it's an abstracting and indexing database where there have been subject terms or these thesaurus terms or controlled vocabulary assigned to it to make it more discoverable. Now, in Web of Science, these terms aren't assigned by, they're assigned not by people, but by just pulling in the author keywords. So the words that have been supplied by authors about their articles, so they're a little bit different, but that's still designed for discovery. So if we look instead at Google Scholar results, so if we look at cheese here, then it still has a little bit of bibliographic information. So this is a bad example, but it's not got any of the subject headings in it. So it does tell you where it's published, but it's missing those subject headings. So it's just like the article as it sits out there somewhere. So I hope that's clear.
Thank you, Carol.
Yeah, and you can always ask a librarian. So they're your great resource for these kinds of questions.
Thank you. Another question that we've got is, how many databases should you search for a literature review?
So again, it depends really on the purpose of your searching. So if you're not needing to be absolutely comprehensive, then sometimes one database that's the best database in your topic is fine. But if it's for a major project, so if you're submitting an article for publication, or if it's your PhD dissertation, then you should definitely be searching more than one database. And the reason for this is, even if all the literature that is actually pertinent is contained in that database that's, you know, most subject appropriate for you, it helps you protect yourself from yourself. So searching errors that we see even, you know, professional librarians sometimes making, where they will miss some of the literature that's appropriate or relevant in a database just because they haven't done the search in an optimal way for the database that they're in. So it's basically you know, a way to hedge your bets to make sure that you're safe. And so in that case, I don't know, I'd say 3 is a minimum, and probably, you know, you go into at least a few to sort of check out how it's doing for your subject, and then perhaps concentrate on the 3 or 4 that are most bringing back the most results. So you feel like this is where I'm going to find the literature on my topic.
Thank you. And we also have, how can you know you are using the best tools for your subject?
So this is a good question. Well, so you want to do some practice searches. So you want to, you know, just test the water in the different databases. So this very much relates to the question before, that, you know, you go and you see is PubMed bringing back literature in your area, or is it really not bringing back literature? Is it bringing back unique literature? So not so much, but a couple of the results are unique compared to FSTA. It depends on your topic. So one thing that's important in doing literature search is to give yourself some time to actually spend doing some exploration. So not necessarily tons of time, but the more you work with databases, the more you get to know them, and you'll have a good sense whether or not it's going to be good. But before you get there, you know, you do the testing yourself. So, and I should put a caveat in there: if you're doing a systematic review where you really do need to find all the literature on a topic, then you'll need to go wider than you will for other projects, because you really, sometimes with systematic reviews, people actually contact researchers about research that's never even been published yet. So it's a different kind of project that's much more comprehensive than other literature searches.
Thank you very much, Carol.
Yeah.
If anyone has any questions that come to mind later, please don't hesitate to get in touch. We'll be sending out our contact details with the recording of the session. We're always very happy to help. We'll also provide another link to the Spanish version of the best practice guide and some of our other free resources, such as our guide to getting published in journals and links to training resources for FSTA customers on EBSCO host. So thank you all, everyone, for joining us today. We hope you have enjoyed this webinar and gained a better understanding of food science and nutrition literature searching. Thank you very much.